Hi students, this is Memo Instruction II, a companion to last week's Memo Instruction 1. I apologize in advance for the sound quality. My headset seems to be picking up a lot of noise. Alright, let's talk about writing the memo, which is your next major assignment. As you might have noticed in the last PowerPoint, I indicated that you need to think about the white paper before you sit down to write a memo. But before you write any kind of business document, a memo, an email, anything else, you need to stop and consider what you're trying to accomplish. If you want to do this, you need to think about audience, message, and purpose. Who's your audience? Whom you're writing to controls a lot of different factors in a business document. In this case, this can control the following, as you can see on the PowerPoint, and other items as well, but especially tone, nuance, level of detail, format, and style, including use of jargon. If you're writing for a lay audience and you're an engineer, you don't want to use a lot of technical terms that your audience won't understand. In this case, according to the scenario, you have a very specific audience. The first thing you need to think about is audience. To whom are you writing? This controls a lot of different factors. You can see some of these on the PowerPoint. These are just the most important ones. Depending on what you're writing, it can cover several things. What I've got here is tone, nuance, level of detail, format, and style. And style here includes the use of jargon. For example, if you're an engineer and you're writing for a lay audience who does not know the ins and outs of engineering, you wouldn't use a lot of really technical terms, calculations, things like that your audience wouldn't understand. As you can see from this slide, first thing you need to stop and consider is audience. Audience can control a lot of different factors when you're sitting down to think first about your document. The ones that I have here are tone, nuance, level of detail, format, and style. Style here including jargon. These are just a few of the things you might want to consider. Depending on the situation, there are other things. In this one, the example of jargon, let's say for instance you're an engineer, but you're writing for a lay audience, just regular people. You wouldn't use a lot of technical terms, a lot of calculations, a lot of mathematical language, because your typical person is not always going to understand that level of detail. So you have to think about whom you're writing to before you can think about what you're going to say and how you're going to say it. So now you have to ask yourself who is the audience for your progress memo and therefore your white paper? Who's given you the assignment? That may not be explicitly stated in the assignment, but you can tell you are working for a major company in this scenario. Is an underling going to give you this kind of assignment? Is a peer going to give you this kind of assignment? No, it's your boss or somebody who is over you. So that controls several aspects of what you're doing. For one thing, you would write differently to a superior than you would to a team that's working under you. Your language would be different, your tone would be different, your word choice would be different in those two different situations. So think about whom you're writing to, and that controls a lot of what you're going to say. And of course the next thing is message, and this one seems really simple on the face, but it's actually got a lot of depth. Because not only do you need to consider what your document is going to say, but you also really have to ask yourself what you're trying to communicate. Now, message ties in really closely with purpose, which we're going to talk about in a moment. Often the two are linked, intrinsically, very inseparable. But think very clearly about what you're trying to communicate. What do you want to get across? In your white paper, and therefore your memo, you're talking about the political, social, historical, cultural situation in a country in which your company may want to open a factory. You're exploring that. We'll talk about how purpose links into that in just a moment, but that's what you're exploring. So think about that. And again, that's going to control several factors in your document, some of the main ones being content, research, and form and design. Here I mean something different than when I was talking about style on the last one. Form and design means how you present your package, and how you might index it, how you're going to lay out that research and that content in order to maximize what you're trying to say. So to that end, stop and ask yourself, what is the message in your progress memo? What are you doing in this memo? You can answer that question about the memo and about your white paper. You're well on your way to having your memo written. Okay, so then we have purpose. And the reason why I say that purpose and message are often linked is because you're not going to have a message without a purpose. You're not going to have a purpose without a message. Okay? You can sometimes separate the content, but those two concepts are linked. Purpose is going to control a lot of different aspects of your document, not limited to, but including form and design, presentation, style, and then again, tone, as with audience. If you are trying to convince someone of something, your tone is different than when you're simply trying to inform. An informational document is usually going to be much more objective, or at least attempt to be more objective, than one that's meant to persuade. So your purpose controls a lot of what you do as well. So what's your purpose for the progress memo and therefore the white paper? This is really the bulk of the white paper assignment, is you're writing for a particular purpose. Your superiors have requested that you investigate a country of your choosing from the list and its potential for a factory for the company. You get to choose a lot of the different aspects of this. You get to choose the company, you get to choose the product if you want to limit it to a single product. You get to choose the country, yes, from within a list. And then you get to choose the aspects of that country that seem to make the most sense for this kind of report. Okay, by the time that you have done a lot of this, you'll understand what you're going to say, but you already know your purpose. Your purpose here is just to inform. So you can really let that guide what you're going to do with this section of the memo and also the white paper. You know you're going to inform. You want to keep things very even-tempered, very even-handed, and just inform. But certain aspects of your research will be more important than others. Again, that ties back into the message aspect of it, but it will control how you design and therefore present the information because you want people to focus on certain areas over others. Okay, so stop and think for just a moment, because you have to design the white paper before you think about your memo. Can you answer the questions that have just been asked about audience, message, and purpose without thinking about the design of your white paper? You probably can't. The good news is, once you do this, once you think about how those aspects are going to affect your white paper, a lot of the work for the memo is already done for you. So here you go. Just use this for your template. Fill it out for yourself. Especially under message, you'll want to write certain things, including notes on the company that you're going to use, including notes on the country that you've chosen. You'll want to do a little bit of preliminary reading. You fill out, though, this template, you do that little bit of preliminary reading, you can write a progress memo. And that's all we're saying here. Fill out the template on the previous slide, write your progress memo from that. And obviously you need to think about format and everything else, but we're going to discuss that in just a moment when we look at a sample memo. So here we've got a really simple, very simple sample memo based on the assignment. You've got your to, your from, your date, your regarding line, and then you've got a very simple format for what goes in it. An intro, you want to kind of introduce what you're doing so in case your boss has forgotten that they gave you this assignment. I have been exploring this potential factory in Bangladesh, etc. And then in the body, that's where you want to do a little breakdown of the items that have been asked for in the white paper and the work that you've done toward them so far. And then you have a section for a conclusion. Is Bangladesh a good choice for a factory for Procter & Gamble? It's that simple. You do this, having answered the questions before, you have a memo. Here, as you can see, I've just broken down the various sections of the memo based on the ideas of audience, message, and purpose. Okay, so if it's that easy, why do you have all of this time to work on a memo? Because you need that time to create a really good, streamlined, efficient, and informative memo. You'll need to remember the paramedic method exercise that we did, the readings that we did on it, and the simple idea of efficiency. Here's something that's really important for you to remember. Empty rhetoric is the enemy. A lot of students in particular, but many professionals, when they sit down to write a formal document, a business document, anything into which they put a lot of importance, they tend to think that more words means more formal. This is not the case. You want to be as straightforward and efficient as possible. Trim everything that isn't necessary for your message. But write your first draft keeping those two things in mind. Be straightforward and clear, and I want you also to explain everything. Okay, so you might think that those two things are contradictory. If you're being straightforward, if you're being efficient, then you can't explain everything. This is not the case. But first things first, explain everything so that you have very clear transitions from one idea to the next, so that you're connecting causal chains, so that when you move from one point to the next, your thought process, your method of getting to the conclusion makes sense to the reader. It's easy to forget that the reader is not in your head. Okay, they can't see everything that you're thinking as you're writing this document, so you have to put it on the page. Let's look at this example. First is the original, second is the corrected from an old white paper on crowdfunding. In the first one, if you look at what's being said, there's an example of a campaign in 1997 when fans raised money for a rock group in the UK, and then it shifts to Artist Share became the first crowdfunding website. Okay, this begs the question of whether or not the fan-run campaign happened on Artist Share, or if Artist Share was started in response to the success of this campaign. If you look at the corrected example, you can see that it's the latter. Artist Share started in response to the success of this campaign when people realized this could be a viable option for fundraising. But in the first example, it's not clear how you got to that conclusion. Okay, so this is why it's important to take a step back and explain every step of your logic. If you do too much, you can always cut it later. Get it on the page in your first draft, however. One way you can check for this is doing what's called a reverse outline. You take your draft, your first draft, and you go through paragraph by paragraph or sentence by sentence, depending on the length of your document, and you outline not what you meant to say, but what's actually there. Doing this can help you see the places where you may have missed explaining those connections. Look at these two sample outlines here. The first one goes through the paragraph that we saw in the previous slide. But if you were missing some connections, a reverse outline can help you see that. And then you can go back in and fill in the blanks. This is one of the few ways that you can see those holes that you missed. Because the problem is, if you're not really careful explaining every step in your first draft, you won't see it afterward without doing something like this. Everything makes sense to you. You wrote it. They're your conclusions. But they have to make sense to your reader as well. Then, once you've done that, you've filled in the blanks, you want to edit your text to streamline it and make it more efficient. Notice I'm not yet talking about proofreading. You're worried about your grammar at this point, but it's not your primary concern. Right now, you're worried about making your text more efficient. Let's look at this example. Throughout the past weeks, I have researched the possible advertising opportunities this company can explore. We have many options when it comes to brand marketing. And look at each sentence. What are you trying to accomplish? What are you really trying to say? Really, this person is just saying, in researching possible advertising opportunities, I've discovered the following. And then the list would actually follow. The first draft, however, is really wordy. It's clogged with extra things. You're repeating. You don't need to do any of that. Just say what you need to say in the most efficient and straightforward way possible. This is just another set of examples. Please read the first one carefully and then read the second rewritten passage. Again, these are examples done using the paramedic method, edited with efficiency in mind to streamline the text, make it more efficient. Finally, don't repeat yourself. If you look at the previous two examples, that's one of the writer's main problems, or the writers. One of their main problems is repetition. Putting in a lot of empty rhetoric, saying the same thing multiple times in different ways. These are the ways that we clog up our documents. Cut all of that. Get it out of your paper. You'll note on these assignments, I'm not giving you requirements on length. I'm not saying this has to be X number of pages. I don't want you putting in filler text. I want you to be informative. I want you to get everything down that you need to. Your memo is going to be at least one page if you're doing the assignment the way it needs to be done. Your white paper is going to be several pages if you're doing the assignment the way it needs to be done. But I'm never going to tell you your white paper has to be 6 pages, because then you fill up with repetition, with extra words, with empty rhetoric that doesn't do anything. Look at each sentence. Ask yourself, what am I trying to say here? What's the quickest, clearest, easiest way I can say it? You don't need fancy vocabulary. You don't need to try to dress it up. Just get your point across. Be informative.